Okay, last week we discussed what did it look like at Sinai, the awesome circumstances of the Sinai revelation, the thunder, the lightning, the fire, the smoke, all of the excitement, and we tried to get at least some sense of what all that was about, each particular effect that was going on, what was the message or what was it trying to bring out. And all of this was sort of the introduction or accompaniment to the revelation of God speaking to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. And what was it that God shared with us at that amazing event? It was the 10 Commandments in one form or another. And again, I use the word 10 Commandments loosely. The Torah describes them as Aseres HaDevarim, the 10 Divarim, which is really like statements. And if you examine them, we've mentioned there's really more like 13 commandments in there, but the Torah is telling us to divide it up into 10. So on some level, so we'll just call it the 10 Commandments. And God reveals that is what ultimately, is transmitted seemingly at Sinai is the 10 Commandments. And we discussed, did God speak all of them directly to the Jewish people, or perhaps only the first two? But even if it was only the first two, they still would have heard all 10 at Sinai, just perhaps indirectly from God. In any event, that was what went down at Sinai, is the 10 Commandments. And that's what we're going to start discussing more in depth tonight. There's a tremendous amount of material that could be touched on. Probably, a lifetime's worth if you go through everything. So we'll try to pick and choose and bring out some interesting and meaningful ideas about the 10 Commandments. So let's start by just reviewing what were the 10 Commandments. And we'll bring up the slides. And here they are again. The 10 Commandments. So number 1, I am the Lord your God. Number 2, you shall have no other gods besides me. And this is the one that kind of ends up being more than one commandment, because it also says you shall not make for yourself an idol, a sculptured image. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. So that's almost sounds like two different ideas, bow down to them and serve them. So this is basically almost 4. That's how we're going to get to 13, I think. You shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, to observe Shabbos. Whoops, wrong way. And we have honor your father and your mother, number 5. Number 6, you shall not murder. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness. And number 10, you shall not covet, not your neighbor's house, wife, slave, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor, you shall not covet. So those are the 10 Commandments. So is there anything unique about the 10 Commandments? Are these more important than the rest of the commandments for some reason? So interestingly, the Talmud, the Mishnah really, our sages teach that in the temple, in the Beis HaMikdash, as part of the service, the prayer service that they had in the Beis HaMikdash, in the temple, they would actually recite the 10 Commandments. Now, we do not have the 10 Commandments in our actual service, and we'll see why in a moment. But in the temple, they did have it. And the Talmud relates the following. The Talmud says, it quotes this idea that the priests in the temple read the 10 Commandments along with the sections of Shema and other sections in the prayers. And then it says, Rav Yehuda said, that Shmuel said, that even in the outlying areas outside the temple, they sought to recite the 10 Commandments in this manner every day. So just like they did in the temple, they wanted to insert the 10 Commandments into the liturgy of the daily prayers. But they already abolished recitation of the 10 Commandments due to the grievance of the heretics. Now, what does that mean? So there's the commentary here, which is the non-bold, explains it based on really the commentary of Rashi, that there were those who argued that the entire Torah, with the exception of the Ten Commandments, did not emanate from God. Only the Ten Commandments came from God, not the rest of the Torah. And to counter that, we didn't want to put any special or too much emphasis on the Ten Commandments, because that would sort of be supporting this heretical idea that only the Ten Commandments are from God. The rest of the Torah was made up later. And to counter that idea, or if we were to single out the Ten Commandments and say them in the daily prayers, so that would seem to give credence or support that there's something more unique, more special, more important about these specific 10. And since that's not the case, so we didn't want to do that, and therefore they did not include the 10 Commandments in the liturgy of the daily prayers. That's basically what this little paragraph in the Talmud is saying. Now, despite this, there were attempts later to try to insert them into the prayers, and not in bad faith, but just we've seen they are, whatever it is about them, we'll have to see. They are unique and important. They were the ones that were spoken at the revelation. We've already mentioned that there's a mitzvah, there's a commandment to remember the revelation. So if that's the case, then maybe it would be a good idea to speak out on a regular basis, daily, the 10 Commandments. That way we can remember them. We can remember the events. It's a great opportunity to recall the events of Sinai as we're supposed to. So there seems to be valid reason for this. And over the centuries, there's been some back and forth between the rabbis and those who make these calls about whether to include them, whether to not. At the end of the day, the custom, the prevalent and prevailing custom is not to mention the 10 Commandments, at least not in the prayers themselves. I think some people might say them afterwards. And it seems to be primarily for this reason. We don't want to make it look like these are somehow more obligatory, more important than the rest of the Torah. Torah has 613 commandments, and all are equally important. Now, this week's Torah portion actually is the parsha that has the 10 Commandments, Parshas Yisro. So for those who will be fortunate enough to attend shul this Shabbos, although it's these days it's limited, people, obviously it's more difficult. But if you would be in shul, you would hear the reading of the Torah, you would hear the 10 Commandments read. And the custom is that we stand for the 10 Commandments. While some people have the custom to stand for the whole Torah reading, anyways, so they're not standing uniquely for the 10 Commandments, but many people generally sit while the Torah is being read, and they stand for very specific special portions. And one of those is for the 10 Commandments. Perhaps, though, we can look on this custom and say maybe that's not the best idea for the same reason. Because why are we giving special attention, special special respect to the 10 Commandments over the rest of the Torah, and showing, and standing specifically for this? That kind of makes it look like these are somehow more important than the rest. So, but despite that, that's the custom, and there may be different reasons for this. But one idea is that when we stand, we're not doing it out of respect or showing that these are more important. We're actually trying to reenact on some level the events of Sinai. So we stand just like our ancestors stood at Sinai when the Torah was given. So in shul each year, when we hear the 10 Commandments, we hear them actually 3 times a year. We hear them the first time they appear in the Torah, which is this week's Torah portion, Yisro. We hear them when they appear in Devarim and Deuteronomy, in Parshas Va'eschanan. And the third time that we hear them is on Shavuos, the holiday of Shavuos, which celebrates the event of the giving of the Torah at Sinai. The Torah reading for Shavuos is drawn from this week's Torah portion, from Yisro. So they're also, we hear the 10 Commandments 3 times a year, and the custom is to stand. And the idea, at least one idea of why it's perhaps different, we're not saying that these are more important by standing, we're just trying to reenact that event on some level by standing just as our ancestors stood. So that's a little bit of a practical, question or application of this concept, this question of whether there, what is special about the 10 Commandments? Are they somehow more important, or otherwise, why are they chosen as the ones that God speaks at Sinai? So this is something I want to explore a little bit further now. So let's look. You'll join me to look at the words of Rabbi Shamshin Raphael Hirsch. And Rav Hirsch says as follows. That's not the one we want. We want, this one. Okay. So Rav Hirsch says the following. In other respects, however, the 10 Commandments have in no wise any greater holiness or greater importance than any other commandment in the Torah. Just as we've been saying, God gave all the commandments. They are all equally important. They are neither the whole law, the 10 Commandments are not the whole Torah, nor are they holier laws than all the rest. God clearly and expressly proclaimed them as being merely a preparatory introduction to the whole following real giving of the law, meaning the giving of the rest of the Torah. Because God says to Moshe, I come to thee so that the people may hear that I do speak unto thee and so have belief in thee forever. Right? So God tells Moshe that the reason why I'm going to speak to you these commandments is really not so much about the commandments themselves. It's more to give the people the opportunity to hear me speak to you, to understand that you are receiving direct prophecy from me, and then they will have belief in you forever. And then when you then transmit to them the rest of the Torah, you will have faith. They will have faith in that. That was the ultimate purpose. That's explicitly stated in the Torah. You want to know why I'm going to tell you speak these commandments out loud to all the people? It's so that they can hear me do it, not so much about the commandments themselves. That's what it says. So thereby, this revelation on Sinai is expressly stated to have for its object solely the preparation of the people for the whole of the rest of the law giving, which was to be transmitted to them by Moshe. The whole point was not so much about them themselves, but for the rest of the giving of the Torah, and to prove to them beyond all possibility of doubt by their own experience that God does speak to man, so that they would receive all the following Torah that Moshe was to bring to them with unshatterable belief and trust as the word of God. So the purpose of the 10 Commandments, again, is not so much for them themselves, but it's more about experiencing that prophecy, which we've spoken about, and then trusting in the prophecy of Moshe when he then goes and transmits to them the rest of the Torah. However, at the end of the day, these 10 were still the ones that were chosen, right? He didn't say, listen to me, just have a conversation with you. We could talk about the weather, I'll predict what the weather is going to be tomorrow. And then they'll hear me speak to you and they'll trust that I speak directly to you. That's not what happened. So at the end of the day, there's more to the 10 Commandments than just being preparatory for what is to come. So Rav Hirsch actually continues on the very next slide, although he wasn't using PowerPoint in the 1850s or whatever when he shared this. He continues and he says, but nevertheless, they are fundamental laws, general headings of chapters, to which the whole of the rest of the law giving are really the ways and means of carrying them out. So he's calling them headings. They're headings, chapters, headings of chapters. So you're going to be able to lay the 10 commandments out, and all the other commandments are going to somehow fall under these different headings. He says, if we consider the order in which these fundamental laws were given, they may express yet one further idea, which may not be unessential, meaning it may be essential for the whole conception of the divine institution of the Torah. The first half begins with, I am, meaning Anochi, I am the Lord your God, and finishes with, honor your father and mother. So if we go back to our first slide, right? So the first half, meaning we have two tablets. That's what I tried to show here. There's the right side of the right tablet. There's the left tablet. And on the right side, we have, I am the Lord your God, going down to honor your father and mother. And on the left, this is what we have. So what does Rabbi Hillel Shaps have to say about this? So he says, the first half, the right side, begins with, I am the Lord your God, and finishes with, honor your father and mother. The second half begins with, do not murder, and finishes with, do not covet. The demand for the recognition of God begins with the demand for the mind. I am the Lord your God, do not have any other gods. So on the right side, which by the way tends more towards and we'll talk about the division more at a later time, but this side primarily deals with mitzvos, commandments that are between us and God. I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods, don't swear falsely by God's name, keep the Sabbath, and then honor your father and mother, sort of the outlier, which the commentaries discuss how that fits in. But these, generally speaking, all have to do with our mitzvos, commandments between man and God. While on the other side, they all have to do with interpersonal, between man and man. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. That's all interpersonal. So Rav Hirsch is telling us that we have on the side of Ben Adam Lamakom, between man and God, we have the demand for the recognition of God begins with a demand for the mind. Believe in God. I am the Lord your God. Do not have any other gods. That has to do with the mind. But it is not satisfied with mere spirit. It demands the expression of the spirit in a letter, in control of a word. The way we speak. Also, it says, do not take God's name in vain. The commandments are not just in our minds, in our heads. It's just you just gotta believe, and then you're all set. No, it goes on. It says it also has to regulate the way that we speak. Do not take God's name in vain. And also they regulate our activities. Remember the Sabbath, keep Shabbat. And finally, of the family. They regulate family life. Honor your father and mother. And he says the same thing on the other side of the tablets. The social laws begin with the demand for control of deeds and words. I'm not sure exactly what they mean by letter. This is an pretty old translation. There might be there's a better or a newer translation. It's translated from the German, by the way. Rav Hirsch lived in Germany. He wrote his commentary in German. But the point is, the social laws also begin with control of deeds and words, but are not satisfied with letter only, but demand control of spirit and feeling. In other words, it's going the other direction, and it's very fundamental. You see, when we deal with people, when we deal with God, we might have the tendency to say, listen, God knows what I'm thinking. What does God really care about? He cares what I think, that I believe in him. What I do doesn't really matter. What I say doesn't really matter. What I believe, that's what matters to God. With people, it's the opposite. Does it really matter what I'm thinking about them? Does it really matter what I'm saying about them? What matters is what I do, how I act towards them. That's what someone might say. So when it comes to the laws between us and God, it starts off by saying, it's not, you're right, it has to do with the mind. I am the Lord your God, do not have other gods. But then it goes up and it says, it's not just about the mind, it's also about the way we speak. Do not take God's name in vain. We must regulate our speech also based on our belief in God. And we regulate our activities by keeping Shabbos or honoring parents. And when it comes to the social laws, in other words, the interpersonal laws, it goes in the opposite order. You might think it's just control of deeds, don't murder, right? Or just control of words, don't bear false testimony against your friend. But we're not satisfied with that. We also demand control of spirit and feeling, do not covet. Even the way that we think is important in interpersonal mitzvos. And Rav Hirsch goes on and he says that this idea, this that he says here expresses a very important idea, that some believe we just have to honor God in spirit. And he says it's not so. If our belief in God, if our idea of God is not strong enough to exercise power over us in a practical way, in controlling our words or controlling our actions, in regulating our family and social life, so then it's not we haven't shown it to be genuine. If it can't actually affect the way I live, if it doesn't affect the way I live, then it's really not that much on its own. And on the other hand, that's with our relationship with God. Right? Our relationship with God, it's only shown to be genuine if we're actually willing to have an effect on the way that we live, the way we speak, the things that we do. But otherwise, we haven't proven it to be genuine. On the other hand, in interpersonal, it's kind of the opposite. In interpersonal, if we don't regulate the way that we speak about others or the way that we think towards others, then our actions are just outward actions. They're not, they don't have a depth to them. If it's outward correctness, he says. You know, we don't hurt people, we don't murder people, but behind their back, I'll say whatever I want about them. You know, I'll think whatever I want about them. So that's a very shallow level of interpersonal relationships. It's basically just an outward show. But if it doesn't take root and doesn't affect us on a deeper level, the way that we speak, the way that we think, so then it's very superficial. And the Torah is teaching us that on both accounts, when it comes to our relationship with God, it's not only about what we're thinking, it's about controlling, regulating the way we speak and the way we act. And when it comes to people, it's not just about actions, it's also about the way that we speak about people, the way that we speak in relationship with people, and the way that we think as well. So that's it's not explicit here that these are his headings in his system. You know, he starts off, he says that there's fundamental laws, general headings, and then he kind of divides them up. There's those that have to do with the spirit, with our minds and with our activities and with the way that we speak. It's not clear if those are what he views as the headings, but he makes two important points here about the structure of the Ten Commandments. First of all, he says they are headings, without going into too much detail about that. And then secondly, he gives us this idea of how they express the total commitment that the Torah is asking from us, both in our relationship with God and our relationship with others. It's, you know, the Ten Commandments themselves express the idea of being of asking or demanding of us to be all in mind, in speech, and in action. Now, looking back for a second at the Ten Commandments, so perhaps we might be compelled to wonder, what's the big novelty about these commandments? Meaning, if I was gonna make my own laws, I'm starting my own religion, my own country, right? My own government. I need some laws. So I think these would be some that are pretty obvious to me. For sure, in terms of civil and secular, shall not murder, not commit adultery, shall not steal, don't bear false witness. Don't covet maybe is already a step beyond where I might have assumed. Honor your parents, that's kind of natural. To have a day of rest, it's a great idea at least. And if this is a religion that has a God, then obviously it's to believe in that God and to not have other gods. But so what exactly is is the point of all this? They seem pretty obvious. To put it the way it's expressed by Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, who wrote Haksav HaKabbalah, the writing and the tradition. So he says, anybody with intellectual honesty will admit that the great initiation that occurred at Mount Sinai wasn't necessary for receiving the Ten Commandments if they include only their outward simple meaning, which are readily understood by anybody. In other words, we had this huge event. We had thunder and lightning, and God comes down in a fire, and there's smoke and clouds, and then they hear a booming voice of God, and they basically perhaps might have reacted like, now tell me something I didn't know, right? What's so, at least for many of them, what's so novel? Why was this so necessary to be accompanied by this great event? He says they are all intuitive commandments that any person with any wisdom will accept upon himself, even without a commandment. So why was it necessary for Moshe to spend 40 days on the mountain and in the end to bring down tablets with these 10 obvious commandments, right? What happens is we have this revelation that we've been talking about, and then Moshe goes up to hang out, to stay on Sinai for 40 days. God teaches him Torah. He comes back 40 days later, and he's holding 2 tablets, and they're worshiping a golden calf, so he ends up smashing the tablets. But he comes back with the luchot, the 2 tablets. And what did the tablets say on them? The Torah tells us, it said the 10 Commandments. So why is all this necessary? So Rabbi Mecklenburg, the Haksav HaKabbalah, he goes on and he tells us the answer. He says the truth indicates that these 10 commandments are commandments that include under them details of details that are innumerable. Just like the tradition that we have, that the 10 commandments include all 613 commandments that are written in the Torah and all that is included in the oral Torah. It's all included in the 10 commandments. That's why it was special. That's why it was meaningful. These aren't just any commandments. They may seem simple on the surface, but really these 10 commandments, he says, he's sort of trying to logically prove it, but we also have a long-standing tradition to this effect, as we'll discuss in a moment. But he's saying, otherwise, it doesn't really make sense that you have this whole great event for something so simple, intuitive, obvious. What's the need for all of it? So he says there must have been more to it. And he says there was more. And it fits into, and this assumption fits into an existing tradition, a very strong tradition, that the 10 commandments actually somehow include all 613 commandments. Sort of like what Rav Hirsch was just saying, that they're headings, they're chapter headings, but perhaps even more than that. That the way he's saying it, they include under them details and details of details. Somehow all the commandments can be included in the 10 commandments. Now, this is an old idea. He's not the first to suggest it. Rabbi Mecklenburg lived in the 1800s. He was actually a contemporary of Rav Hirsch. He also lived in Germany. And so But the truth is that this tradition goes back much further. It's most famously attributed to Rav Sadia Gaon. Rav Sadia Gaon was from the Gaonic period, which is precedes what we call the Rishonim. The Rishonim are like the medieval commentaries, like Rashi, Rambam, Rav Sadia Gaon. I'll just give you an exact or a more exact date. Rav Sadia Gaon, 882 or 892 to 942. So he lived in the 9th to 10th century. And most often this idea is attributed to Rav Sadia Gaon, that the 613 commandments are all included within the 10 commandments. However, it really goes back even further than that, as we'll see. So one place that's much earlier than, or considerably earlier than Rav Sadia Gaon is in the Midrash. The Midrash, I don't know exactly when the different Midrashim were all compiled, but it certainly precedes Rav Sadia, and it collects teachings that are much older than that, to the beginning of the, probably teachings that they go back to the time of the Mishnah, and perhaps even earlier. So in the Midrash, it says this idea. It says the 613 mitzvos, commandments, are absorbed in them, in the 10 commandments. That's the type of language you use, balul, which is like absorbed in them. And so you find that there are 613 letters from Anochi, the first word of the 10 commandments, until the last two words, asher l'reacha. So, which means that belongs to your friend. The last of the commandments is do not covet, ... don't covet his house, his wife, and then it says, and all that belongs to your friend. The kol asher l'reacha. And if you don't include those last two words, then the number of letters in the 10 commandments actually comes out to 613. Now, that's great, but what about those last two words, right? So if you include these last two words, then the letters, this is 7 letters, right? Another 7. So it comes out to 620. So there's 620 letters in the 10 commandments. So it's 613 mitzvos plus 7. And there's different explanations for what those 7 represent. The Midrash says that they correspond to the 7 days of creation, in order to teach you that the world was created in the merit of the Torah. The 7 is to remind us of the 7 days of creation, that the whole world exists in the merit of the Torah. Other explanations are that the 7 correspond to the 7 Noahide laws, which we spoke about a couple weeks ago. Another idea is the 7 corresponds to 7 rabbinic mitzvos, or 7 rabbinic commandments, like the mitzvah of Chanukah, to light the candles, and the mitzvah of Purim, and a few others that are rabbinic, and that there is an allusion already here that those 7 rabbinic commandments somehow become part of the greater corpus of Torah law. So different ideas of what the 7 are, but it's nonetheless, we find that there are 613 letters plus these last 7 in the 10 commandments, and this is a hint, according to the Midrash, to the idea that all of these commandments are somehow included in the 10 commandments. Midrash goes on and says essentially the same idea in a few different ways, but it's clearly making this point. One of the earliest existing divisions we find, and we're about to discuss one, but we find many different explanations in the commentaries for how the 10 commandments, how do they break down into all of to somehow include all of the 613 commandments? How do you divide them up? How do you put each one in its place? So one of the earliest divisions is actually found, I didn't see it myself inside, but I saw this quoted in the works of Philo of Alexandria. Philo was this Greek Jewish philosopher, or Roman Jewish philosopher, and he Greek, I guess, right? Philo is back, yeah. So And that's pretty early. That's during the second temple period. And so he has a work actually on the 10 Commandments, apparently. Again, I didn't see it inside, but apparently he has a work about the 10 Commandments. And in that work, he describes how they are headings for the rest of the mitzvos of the Torah. He does not say there that there are 613 mitzvos in the Torah. He doesn't write that, but he does write how the 10 Commandments are headings, and he explains apparently, what each of them represents, and then he gives examples of certain commandments that fit under different headings. We find in some commentaries the suggestion or the mention that the division, the way you divide them up, goes all the way back to Sinai, which really makes sense, because if indeed the Jewish people were given the 10 Commandments as headings and chapters, along with, to represent the rest of the Torah, then it follows, it's very logical that they were taught how to break it down and where each mitzvah fits into each heading. There is a midrash that actually somehow they could see that on the tablets themselves. I think this was more of a mystical idea. I don't think they were all of the commandments were written on the tablets, but again, the tablets were, the first set of tablets at least, were a work of God, and all options are on the table then. So the possibility, and this is mentioned in the midrash, that they were actually able to look at the tablets. I don't think they were able to look at them for very long before they got smashed, but had they looked at them, they would have been able to see, actually, to read all the commandments of the Torah within the 10 Commandments. Again, a mystical, miraculous way. But in any event, the commentaries discuss how do we take the 10 Commandments and break them down into all of the mitzvos. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to find, some of these lists, and they're not easy to work through. Rav Sadia Gaon himself, who I mentioned is one of the earliest sources, he actually, there may be other places where he writes about it, or he writes his divisions, but it seems that the primary place that we have where he divides up all of the commandments within the 10 Commandments is actually a liturgical poem that he wrote to be recited on Shavuos, on the holiday of Shavuot. Is this long poem, and it's written in rhyme, and so in other words, it's not so clear what he's always referring to, because it's sort of flowery and written in this poetic way. But over there he goes through each commandment, so it starts with Anochi, I am the Lord your God, and poetically he starts to describe all these different commandments under that heading, and then he moves on to the next one and describes various commandments. I saw that there's probably about 10 or 11 different ways of listing them and dividing them and headings for what the commandments are. What we're going to do now is just look at one, which is the commentary of the Ralbag. The Ralbag was I refer to as a medieval commentator. The Ralbag, Rabbi Levi ben Gershon, 1288 to 1370, a provincial philosopher. I don't know if that means he was from Provence, and a physician, mathematician, astronomer, Talmudic commentator, and he has an extensive commentary on all of Torah, as well as most, if not all, of the prophets as well. Actually, his commentary is unique. It's, first of all, it's detailed. It's based on pshat, the simple understanding usually, and at the end of each section, he writes what he calls like the lessons, and he has these long lists and lists of all the lessons that you learn from those chapters. So a very interesting commentary. And when he writes about the 10 Commandments, so first he makes a point which we mentioned in a previous class, but I don't think I had seen it explicitly. I kind of intuit it from different things that the commentators were saying and put it together, but he says it explicitly, which is the following. He says these 10 statements include all the mitzvos of the Torah. Okay, we've said that. It was for that purpose that God wished that they hear them in this miraculous way and not from the mouth of Moshe. So he's going with the assumption, with the opinion that they heard all 10 commandments. And he says it was important that they hear them all 10 from God, so they should believe in them to the extent that there should leave no doubt that they come from God. For by believing in them, they will believe in all the mitzvahs of the Torah which are included in them. So we said this in an earlier class. The idea is that it's not just that you hear the 10 commandments. Now you know that God speaks to Moshe. So now we'll believe everything that Moshe says. That's one way to understand it. But he's saying more. He's saying that the 10 commandments include the rest of the Torah. So in a sense, we heard the whole Torah from God directly, right? Because we heard the 10, and the 10 include everything else. So on some level, we heard the entire Torah directly from God. When I spoke about this in a previous class, I spoke about it in the context of, and it became a part of us, that in that moment of hearing God speak, it entered our hearts and it became a part of us. And within each one of us is the potential, the ability, and the desire to fulfill all of the Torah. That was instilled in us at that moment. So that's how he introduces. And then he begins to break it down for us. And he's going to break down the 10 commandments in the following way. He says that as an introduction, we have to understand that we have a goal. We often will have a goal in mind, and then we have the steps that it takes to achieve that goal. And so, for example, right, if somebody wants to build a strong house, they want to build a strong house. So there's steps needed to build that house. You need to get the materials, the stone from one place, the bricks from another, the beams, right? You have many things that go into this building, but the purpose of everything is the building, and you begin with the end in mind. You begin with the end in mind. So you have your ultimate goal that stated at the beginning. And he says that's the idea of the order of the 10 commandments. The end in mind is we want to reach the point where we have perfection in both character, our character traits, and in our mindset, in our beliefs. We want to perfect both actions and mind, character, traits, and beliefs. And so the ultimate end game is living with the idea of Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. The first of the 10 commandments. That's beginning with the end in mind. That's the ultimate goal of everything. And because it's the most important, it's mentioned first. But it doesn't mean that it's the easiest to properly attain. There's an order of how you get there, really, and it's the backwards order of the 10 commandments. You start, so to speak, at the end, and then you which are the easier, and you arrive eventually at the end goal. And that's what the Torah in general tries to do for us, is to bring us to that goal of perfection of both our character traits and of our mindset, and our mindset in terms of our belief and relationship with God. So he says that there's two parts to this. The way that we achieve perfection in our character is by, the way that we act towards others, and refraining from doing certain things, and positive acts that we perform, and then the way that we achieve perfection in mind is in developing certain beliefs and avoiding certain beliefs, and then we can perfect our belief and our minds. But the first step is to perfect our midos, our character traits, because we first need to perfect our character, he says, before we can perfect our minds and our beliefs. Or we have to work on that at least. So he says that's the order of the Ten Commandments. It starts with the perfected beliefs and ends with the character, but really it's backwards because you have to work starting from the end back to the beginning. And so when he goes through the Ten Commandments, he goes through them backwards and starting from the end, and he breaks them down as follows into the following categories. He says the last 5: do not covet, do not bear false witness, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not murder. All of these are refraining from evil in the area of character traits, in the way that we act. Honor your father and mother is now a positive. This represents positive acts in the area of character traits. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. So he says this is refraining from evil, meaning prohibitions, as well as the positive acts, because there's positive commandments and negative commandments in observing Shabbos in both areas, character traits and belief. Now, this was an interesting one to me. He says that Shabbos isn't only about belief, which, Shabbos testifies that God created the world. Right? It's very much to me about belief, but he also says it's about character traits. His angle, I think, he says he talks about it elsewhere. He only tells you like one little line here, but he says it has to do with our attitude towards work. That I think what he's saying is that through observance of Shabbos, then we're more honest with our work during the week. I think that's his angle, but it wasn't clear to me exactly how he understood why Shabbos has to do with character traits, but he puts it sort of as a bridge, that this has to do with both character traits and belief. And then you have these two: you shall not swear falsely, and you shall have no other gods. Those are refraining from evil in the area of belief. And then I am the Lord, your God, positive acts in the area of belief. So we'll give a little bit more detail to this, and then that'll be our closing thought. So he breaks it down a little bit further, and he talks about each one individually. So he says that the last of the commandments, do not covet. He says, we don't think of this is a sin in our minds, right? This all happens in our heads. When we talk about the details of this, we'll discuss how exact that is. Does one have to do something does one have to act on it to actually transgress this? When we discuss each individual commandment, we'll get more into the practicalities. But on its most basic level, this is something that only happens in the mind. Coveting. What's wrong with that, right? Like Rav Hirsch said, what's wrong with coveting? It's only in my mind. Doesn't hurt anyone. I didn't act on it. But he says that really this leads to these. Number 10 leads to perhaps number 9, but it leads to number 8, leads to number 7, leads to number 6. It's a gateway. It's a gateway. Coveting is a gateway to adultery, to stealing, to murder, if we can't achieve what we want in a different way. If there's something that we really desire and we can't get it, then we try to get it by illegal means. And so And so that's the first step is and it takes us in that direction. First, do not covet. And this is a sin in thought. And he actually over here doesn't give any examples of other mitzvos, other commandments that would fall under this. I was trying to think if there are other commandments that relate to thought, but not so much in the negative sense, more in the positive sense of loving God, loving our friend. And I don't think those fall under this, but he says that's where it starts. Then it goes to, again, similar to Rav Hirsch, it goes to prohibitions involving speech. Do not bear false witness is a chapter heading for prohibitions involving speech. And again, we don't consider this an act towards others if we speak. And it's certainly, people would take it lighter than actually actively acting against another person, to the point that someone who wants to take action against their friend may refrain from doing it actively, but will get them in a different way. I'll just get them in court, right? I'll testify. Let's say, just to use an extreme example, somebody wants someone murdered. He's not going to do it. He's not going to act on that, but maybe he'll testify falsely that the other person murdered someone, or something like that. So at times the something spoken can have the effect almost as bad as an action, but people don't view it that way. They take it lighter, and that's why it appears earlier or later in the commandments here. It's an earlier step in perfection. It's not viewed as bad, but it's something that also needs to be stamped out. And under this comes other prohibitions that involve speech, such as lashon hara, slandering, speaking ill about others, and talebearing, etc. The next section, number 8, do not commit adultery. So these are prohibitions involving actions where both sides derive pleasure. So you're not hurting someone, but the Torah views it as immoral, and so does society for that matter. But again, somebody will rationalize that I'm not directly hurting someone, and therefore it's not so bad. And again, so that's why this appears earlier or later again than the others, than things that are more active and damaging, where the other person actually is directly hurt. This is both derive pleasure, and this would include any of the sexual prohibitions, all the sins falling under sexual immorality, and it's the category of prohibitions involving actions where both sides derive pleasure. Number 7, do not steal. Prohibitions where the victim doesn't know he has been injured. So it's talking about a type of stealing where the person doesn't know about it. So they, what they don't know can't hurt them, right? So a person, again, is sooner able to, it's an action, so it's harder to, and it hurts someone, so it's harder to rationalize than some of the earlier ones, but yet someone might still rationalize it because if they don't know about it, then they're not really hurt by it. And included in this would be any this is the most extreme example. The 10 Commandments are giving the most extreme example and within each category, but this is the most extreme, where you're actually stealing with your bare hands directly, but a person could also refrain from returning a lost object where they know who the owner is. They can refrain from giving tithes that they're supposed to give to the Kohen, to the Levi. They could be in charge of watching something and they could use it without the owner knowing, when they're not allowed to do that, right? It's hurting someone without their knowledge. And so that's the next heading. Number 6, do not murder is prohibitions where the victim knows he has been injured. I guess once he's dead, he doesn't know, but that's the general category, is somebody knows that they're being hurt. And this will include many things, and this would be the worst type of action of all of these, the hardest for someone to rationalize, and would include any sort of damage where the person knows about it, and with all the commandments that tell us to prevent damage, to protect others from damage, such as putting a fence. If you have a flat roof, you have to put a fence around it so nobody falls off. Many different commandments that have to do with protecting others or not damaging others. Protecting ourselves as well would be included in this, not injuring ourselves. And he says the laws about kosher eating fall under this, because he says he understands that eating non-kosher is damaging to us, and that would fall under this according to the way that he divides up the categories. And those are actions where someone is doing an act, and the victim knows that they are being acted upon, and that's the highest and of all these actions, the most difficult to justify, and it falls under number 6. Number 5, now he shifts to positive actions, providing for others their deserved portion, he says. And this he considers the worst. The worst is to not honor one's father and mother. But and a person can arrive at that, not giving them the honor and respect they deserve and appreciation, if they live such a way and they don't give others that which they deserve. He includes in this category certain laws of charity in general, right? That if we have the means to help others, then we are supposed to do so. And in a sense, just as God provides for us, so we are to provide for others if we have the means, and we're holding back something that they deserve if we don't do that. Primarily he deals with different mitzvos, commandments related to helping others and giving someone a loan, or there's many different categories in the Torah of things that fall under charity, and he puts all those into this category. Providing others, this is actions, positive acts in the area of character traits. Number 4, remember the Shabbos and keep it holy. Refraining from evil and positive acts in both areas, character traits and belief. Again, I told you before, I'm not so clear why this relates to character traits. He has some idea why it does, but he includes with this not just Shabbos, but the holidays as well, observing the holidays. He includes in this observing general things that are holy, so that the temple, keeping the holiness of the temple, respecting the holiness of the temple, which certainly relates to belief. And again, not sure so much why it relates to character traits, but he feels that it does. Number 3, you shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God. This is a prohibitions that bring to disgrace God's name. Probably should say prohibitions that bring disgrace to God's name. Actions that disgrace God's name. Swearing falsely by the name of God is a disgrace to God's name, and so any actions, I suppose, that bring disgrace to God would fall under this category. Number 2, you shall have no other gods besides me. Prohibitions that involve attributing power to other gods or powers. So whether it's idolatry, whether it's tapping in, the Torah forbids us from using certain types of divination and magic, and those would fall under this category. And then finally, this is one of the very big category, is I am the Lord your God, positive acts that promote belief in God, and many commandments fall under this. So for example, the mitzvos, commandments that bring us to a belief in God, such as prayer, or commands that are associated with this, like fearing God and loving God. walking in God's ways, emulating God, believing in God that he's one, believing in his prophets, building a temple for him, wearing tefillin, having a mezuzah, reciting the Shema, studying Torah, all of these that enhance our relationship with God, enhance our belief in God, all would fall under the category number 1 of Anochi, of I am the Lord your God. So this is just a certain way to break it down. Again, he doesn't go through every mitzvah. He gives general categories. I just want to give you an example of how you could do it, how you could break it down. This is how Ralbag broke it down. As I mentioned, there's certainly others. The other ones that I looked at were more like lists. I couldn't get really a sense of what the system was that they were using. But that's the general idea. So just to summarize very quickly what we did tonight, we talked about the idea that, the 10 Commandments are not specifically more important than all the other mitzvos. That's why we don't include them, especially in the prayers, yet we do stand for them when they're read in shul. That's out of, at least according to one opinion, to reenact the SINAI event, not so much out of respect that these are any more special than the rest of the Torah. Rav Hirsch told us that they are, that on the one hand, the Torah tells us explicitly that the purpose was just for us to hear God speak, so we would believe in God's transmission of the rest of the Torah to Moshe. But then he tells us a little bit more that also they act as headings. They act as headings that it's not enough just to believe in God. We have to actually regulate ourselves based on that belief in God, regulate our speech, regulate our actions. In interpersonal commandments, it's not enough just not to act against others. We also have to watch the way we speak towards and about others. We have to be careful about the way we think towards and about others. And we pointed out that the Ksava Kabbalah, he says this whole event, this whole amazing event just for the 10 Commandments, they seem intuitive, they seem obvious. Why do you need such an event? The answer is because the 10 Commandments are much more than meets the eye. They are headings and categories for all the mitzvahs of the Torah. We have a very old tradition to this idea. Some say it goes back all the way to Sinai, how it's broken down. We find as early as Philo has a division, but certainly the many commentators, we find many, many ways of dividing up the 10 Commandments into 10 categories of mitzvos that all the 613 mitzvos fall under. And finally, we saw one approach, which was the approach of the Ralbag of how to break it up. All right.